disruption is not squirrel brain addition of things. It's not piling things on, right? It's moving from one to another in a meaningful way. And like we said earlier, making sure that it's threaded within the culture and the core competency of your team and what you're doing. Good morning, Matt.
Rick, welcome back, man. You're a man on the road these days.
I've been a traveling fool. I feel like it's the old days.
Yeah, I don't even really honestly know where you were last week.
I don't either, really. I just show up and we were at yet another franchise broker event, so speed dating. But a lot of them, we get up and move. This one is we sit at a table and the consultants just rotate around in sort of clockwise formation. So
have you ever actually done speed dating?
No, that would be really interesting. I feel like I'm really good at it now. Like there's a great article someone wrote, a psychologist, and it was like how to make somebody fall in love with you in 30 minutes, or it might have been less time. But it was basically questions that you ask someone, and if you ask them those questions and they give you answers, they'll fall in love with you. So I've got if Andrea ever leaves me, I've got the formula for how to make this work.
You got it?
I got this.
Yeah, all right. Well,
she just laughs when I say that, by the way. I'm like, if you ever leave, I got a formula. I'll be fine.
I think I've said something to my wife like that before, and she just laughed too.
Yeah.
Say, okay.
It's like, meanwhile, I mean, she doesn't even really listen. Like if I say it now, it's not even a joke. It's not funny at all. She just like looks at me and then carries on about her business. It's not even any fun because like the fun of saying that is to get a rise out of them, right? Yeah. I get nothing.
Yeah.
She gives me zero.
Buddy.
I get a look that would insinuate good luck, buddy. And then she walks off. I get nothing.
Yeah.
So, well, we had, my son's home. So he's above water for a minute. So he's back from it was going to be his last underway that he just did. So for those of you guys listening, he's an officer on a nuclear submarine. And did his last underway, and then he's going to be stationed over in Italy for a couple of years, so he's looking forward to that. But he's been home hanging out, so I haven't seen him in a while, that was fun. And we had a lot of family meals, and like my mom came over, and we got everybody together, so we had a good time. And the other day, this is funny, we were talking about wives, that reminded me of this. So everybody was finished eating, and then Andrea was like, "Hey, babe, can you clear the table?" And I had to get a running start, but I actually made it.
I mean, your setups are just on point these days.
Yeah.
And again, everybody saw that coming.
I know.
They're always around Andrea. Do you know that?
All of mine have to do with wives. I don't know. To me, that's a funny thing. Like I find marriage to be very interesting. To be living with the same person for 28 years, it's not easy. So I find a lot of humor in that's the way I survive it, actually, Matt.
Well, let me ask you this. What kind of bagel can fly?
I don't know.
A plain bagel. I can only do the short ones because honestly, between looking it up and sitting down, I'll forget anything longer.
Well, and by the way, we have a subject to talk about afterwards. So I'm like, damn, my dad joke. But that one I liked. I don't know why. It was just so funny. My wife asked me to clear the table. I mean, I had to get a running start, but I made it. Just dumb. I like it. Thanks. So what we are going to talk about today, Matt and everyone listening, is how and why it's important for you to disrupt your own business, which sounds silly. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Like if I'm like, hey, the
counterintuitive sometimes.
It is. Yeah, exactly. It's like, what does that mean? Because I've also spoke and post all the time about focus is a superpower. Stay focused, stay focused. So to then say, well, the key to staying in business and evolving is to disrupt your own business.
Just keep us all confused. Nobody knows what to do next.
What? Huh? What? What's he doing? What's he talking about?
Yeah.
Or I'm just insane. But the idea is this. Look, I originally heard the idea from Howard Schultz, the famous Starbucks CEO. Yeah. And he's under a lot of heat right now for some anti-union maneuvers that he's doing, which, whatever about that. But they can't deny he's grown a corporately owned business to 3,800 locations or something crazy. And he basically said that if you're not disrupting your own business periodically or often, then I guarantee you that the small and large competitors in your markets will do it for you.
Right.
And so what I'm really meaning by disrupt your business is to get out ahead of the changes that need to be made to continue to evolve the business. Now, in saying that, with our joke about staying focused, I think the real key is that you can do that while keeping the disruption threaded within the culture and the direction of the business. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because yes, too much disruption, scattershot everywhere, is what a lot of entrepreneurs do. We jokingly call it squirrel brain or whatever. That's not good for your business. But disrupting it in a meaningful way while keeping it threaded within your, keeping the main thing, that's really the key. It's just difficult to do.
Well, I mean, I've been here obviously a long time. I've seen a lot of disruption. But what I will say is you have a unique ability to see things ahead of like where things are going, and especially in the industry. And it comes from a lot because you hang around with rub shoulders with a lot of top names in in fitness. But you've always been able to push us in where everything is headed.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, I've got friends in the industry that would claim that they literally decide what's next or whatever. I'm like, yeah, it's probably a bit much. I mean, you kind of have to look at markets and conditions and zoom out. And I mean, you can't be working in your business. You got to be able to have time to just think and say, well, if this and that doesn't really make sense, I really think we're here, right? Or we're good where we are, or no, this needs to change. So I thought the best way to do this would just to be, because I started thinking, well, what kind of disruptions have we made? I mean, let's give people examples of disruptions that we've made in our own business and what the results and why we did them. And you can speak to them because you've been through 12 years of them, which has been a lot, right? So we'll start with just brands. So when we first opened in 1992, we did one-on-one training only. Most people at that time, at least through my lens, because I was only 22, all wanted to get in amazing aesthetic shape, right? So we named the name of the business Good Bodies, which I always tell a story. I must have told it a million times, that we had some trainers that were leaving, and this was probably 6 years after we opened, been with me the whole time. And I wasn't happy that they were leaving because they were trying to do some nefarious things and take people with them. And so we were having a little bit of an argument, and the one guy said, you know what? Because I basically said, listen, you can leave if you want, but I'm telling you, as easy as this looks, it's not easy to own a business. You'll see. And then he said, oh, yeah? Well, I'm going to go right down the street from you, and I'm going to call it Better Bodies. I was like, oh, you bastard. Like, you wouldn't, right? So I thought, well, I'll be Best Bodies. It's like again, Good Bodies was a cool name until it wasn't, right? Plus, it was a little bit cheesy. I mean, obviously now you see the old pictures: teal carpet, muscle pants, fanny packs. It's like,
I think we bring it back.
Bum bags,
just full rebrand.
Yeah, I mean, come all the way back. 80s are coming back, right? So Good Bodies, and then when we evolved a little bit, we renamed it to a regional name. So we're in an area, and when we first moved out here, this didn't even exist. But then they built a mall, and there's like a North Point Mall. But then there's North Point Parkway, and then there's North Point Ford and North Point Chevy, and like everything around here can be North Point. North Point, doctor's offices, everything's called North Point. So I was like, well, that will help, because we were only one gym at the time. So I'm like, let's call it North Point. So it became North Point Personal Training. Then we started to stack other services on, which I'll get to. I'm going to talk about like the 4 verticals that we've evolved in and why. Then we started to do other things around that. So then we evolved it into North Point Fitness, and we changed the logo once again, right? Not too much of a departure, but also easier to say. North Point Personal Training, that's a mouthful, lots of P's in there. And then when we went to licensing, we had, licensees at the time, which are not franchisees, but our white labeled version of what we were doing. We're saying, like, what do we call this thing? Like, what is this? I'm like, it doesn't matter what you call it. You're going to rebrand it anyway. It's all white labeled. So you got to call it what you're going to call it, right? And they're like, yeah, but I want to be able to call it, like, to my team, we're bringing in blank. And North Point's not like we had no branding that would transfer outside of our, local area. So we hired a branding firm out of San Francisco, actually a naming firm only, paid a bunch of money. We've talked about this on a branding podcast. Got a name, took it to a local boutique place here in Atlanta. They built the logo and the taglines and everything around it. And then we launched as Alloy. And it took us a while. We kept the facility branded as North Point for probably a couple of years after that. And Alloy was what we were taking to market, which is a way slicker brand. And we're like, well, this is dumb. Well, if we got a kick-ass brand, why don't we rebrand the facility to what, like what we're doing? And we rebranded here, to
when everybody thought you sold the business.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that too, man. Feel free to chime in on like disrupting your business. It means change, and people hate change. And we talk about like the way that change works. I've got that great video from Rick Warren, I think is his name, from one of those super churches out west. And he's basically talking about how they went from like 50 people to like 50,000 people every Sunday, like amazing growth, and how fast they grew. And he talked about you can't have change without loss. You can't have loss without pain. You can't have pain without grief. And when you understand the psychology of change, even something as simple for us as a rebrand, if it was change with loss, loss with pain, pain with grief, even losing the name, even if the characters were the same in the business, which they were, service offerings were the same. People grieved, and I'm air quoting, the loss of North Point and said, oh, it's too corporate. I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, it's the same people. The wall that used to be brick is now white brick.
Right.
That's the only difference.
The name and the colors shook them.
Shook them to the core, man. We accidentally, our painter accidentally painted the doors this alloy yellow, which if you guys have seen it, it's bright. So it's made to be a splash of color, not an entire wall or something, right? And the painter accidentally painted the doors across the back of our facility, this color, and they're all facing the room. And we literally had clients like, if you don't repaint those doors, I'm going to quit. I can't do this. This is just too much. And of course, we were like, really? What's going on? But that's the psychology and how hard it is to change. So disrupting your own business, it's hard for you, but it's equally as hard for everyone. So you got to set a culture for it. You need to plan it. You need to do it in the right way. But as far as branding is concerned, that's 4 different brands that we've been through in 30 years. I mean, you don't stay in a business for 30 years if you do the same thing. You can't. It's impossible.
I mean, the disruption of the last change is the biggest, right? I mean, you went from the local name to the bigger brand, which from a business standpoint, you saw far enough ahead that it's going to be more impactful when my home base has got the name.
Right. Well, we had people wanting to come visit.
Right.
And they'd be like, why is this North Point? I thought this was Alloy. And it's like, yeah, why don't we it's just one facility at that time.
Right.
Let's rebrand it. Right. That's brands. Let's talk about services. So the things that we've done in 30 years, right? You've been a big part of these. And these are really interesting to get to add and certainly to take away, which we've done.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? So when you look at when we opened, we were one-on-one training, all 1 hour training.
Yep.
That's all that it was, right? And in probably 3 or 4 years, we started to understand that, wow, if we go from one-on-one training to 30-minute training, we can get 80% of the work done that we would in the longer session in half the time, and we can charge probably 80% of the rate that we're getting, right? Or 60% or whatever. But then and it would increase our capacity to help more people. Yep. But it would also then drive our average hourly rate a lot higher, right? So was it the cart or the horse? It's hard to say. It's probably a little bit of both, if I'm honest. But so we would say you have a $60 hour, which I think we were in the 90s, in the early 90s. You go to a $40 half hour. Well, that's easy math. That's an $80 hour, right? So coaches can make more. We could make more. We just had to kind of tweak our programming a little bit, shave a little bit of the fluff off. Turns out that, as we're going to talk about, the fluff ended up being kind of important. So we probably shouldn't have done that, because we'd say, well, we'll just have them come in early and do all their little recovery stuff and mobility work that they need to do. And they just wouldn't do it, right? They would zip in at the last minute. It's just human nature.
Yeah, it was probably fun, dropping people from an hour to 30 minutes. I wasn't a part of that one. That was the one I wasn't a part of.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't even think you were part of going from that to
a
small group, were you? Yeah. So you think about it as like another one. This is service offerings that we disrupted even before you got here, which you've only been here, 12 years?
Only.
Well, I'd say that's less than half of our lifespan. So I've been open. I was open without you longer than I've been open with you. That's hard to believe, isn't it?
Well, yeah. See how far I've taken you.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks, Matt. Ever since Matt came on board, we've really blown up. So 1 hour to 30 minutes. And then, I've told the story before, so but you weren't part of it, which was, can I bring a friend in? It's like, sure. Well, then we should probably do an hour. And then we would charge each one of them what our 30-minute rate was. And then they'd say, well, can we bring another person in? It was like, oh, yeah, right. Sure. So we might offer a little bit of a discount. But what it would end up being is like 3 or 4 people that all knew each other, all friends that they were bringing in. They're having a really good time. They're paying a little bit less. My hour's worth a lot more. And there's a lot of really cool things that were happening in that setting where it's like, man, this is awesome. Like they pay less each. I make way more per hour. It's a little bit more fun. I don't have to carry the entire conversation and all the entertainment. They do a little bit of that. There's this kind of fun professional boundary that I can create between coach and clients,
right?
Almost like sports teams, right? Where they're like, don't do it if he tells you to. He's not going to, you know what I mean? That kind of idea. And that became really a cool, organic development. And then we looked at it and we were like, okay, that's where the business is going. Again, to your point, it's like maybe that will be the one skill that I've mildly developed, which is okay, there's something here. People having fun, they pay less, we make more. Coaches can make more. Like, this is pretty interesting as a business model, and it's a lot more fun. So it's good. It's a true win-win, right? So we shifted our model. You talk about disrupting your model. If you took everyone with the brand promise of personal training from one coach to one client in 30 minutes to 4 clients with one coach, and we're like, hey, we just ripped the Band-Aid off. It's like there's no good way to go about it, right? We're moving our entire business to what we were called at the time semi-private personal training, right? And man, it was like you would have thought we were, just murdering the whole gym. People were like, "Oh, this is terrible," blah, blah. And we were already doing it, which is weird, right? If you took the groups that had maybe 3 or 4, they would say things like, say it was just 3, and now we were going to go to a capacity of 4. They're like, "You mean you're just going to put somebody in my group that I don't even know?" I was like, "Yeah, you'll be fine." And then, you know what I mean? And other people were like, "You're taking the personal out of personal training." And I have a famous story about one guy, and you know him. He was a golfer, and I think he was like early retired or whatever. He was the one who was just like, "This is bullshit. I'm not going to do it. You're pulling the wool over my eyes." I'm like, "Listen, if by pulling the wool over our eyes, you mean that I'm giving you more service for less money, yes, you're right. That's the kind of wool I'm pulling over your eyes," being facetious. But it was like, so it took a year to get everyone to transition over. We had a few holdouts that like, I just don't want to do it. Just don't want to do it. And eventually, as you know, we would show that video of the dancing guy at the festival where pretty soon, like he was the oddball dancing and everybody joined him, and pretty soon the oddballs were the ones not dancing.
Right.
Very similar here in the sense that like all of a sudden 90%, within 6 months, 90% of people are doing it. Not only are they doing it, they're loving it. Then the people that weren't doing it were like, "All right, fine, I'll do it." You know what I mean? And then they would finally transition over and do it. And that same guy that was the one that was the biggest not complainer, it's about the guy who was most opposed to it, put it that way. A year later, I can recall I was leaving and he was standing at the desk. It was like Friday afternoon, and he was like, "Hey, what do you guys have on Monday or whatever?" And whoever was working there was telling him, "We've got this time." And he said, "Well, how many people are in that session?" And he's like, "I'm not coming unless there's at least 3 other people." Like he literally went from like, "I'll never do this. You're pulling the wool over my eyes somehow," to listen, I'm not coming unless there's this many people at least, because I hate doing it by myself now. So that was kind of a proud moment for me. It's because like finally, like the longest and most guy that was the most against the change was the one that now is the most adamant about the fact that it's way better that there's people in the group. That's kind of a nice moment for me.
I mean, when you went from 1-to-1 to small group, other than you can make more per hour, better for the member, all that kind of stuff, what was the pain point? Like, what did you see? Was there a lot of people coming into the area doing personal training at that time? Was there like, what were you trying to solve there?
I really wasn't. And, we take the same lens on our competition now as we did then. Like, I like to be aware of what they're doing, but I don't want them sitting at the table when I'm making my business decisions, right?
Gotcha.
And I mean that figuratively. Like, I'm not making my decisions based on what my local competition's doing.
Sure. I
need to be aware of it. I need to understand the market and what's going on. But I'm not making decisions based on my competition. I'm trying to do what's best for my customers and best for my business. And hopefully those two things align perfectly, which they did. And we changed our business model. We were the first, probably one of the first in the country to do it. As you know, that then led to, other things that we'll talk about, outside. Like, what did we do outside of our gym and how did that evolve? Because that evolved as well, right? So big risk, to pivot away from that and go to group training. But we landed it. It was awesome. And then we were one of the first in our market to do like what we would call boot camp. So just sticking 20 people in a room and getting them hot and sweaty, right? And we looked at it as like you had your strength days, which were your personal training days, and then those were sort of your cardio days, if you will, right? Yeah. That was pre-1,000,001 other brands in market doing that, like your Orange Theories, your F45s, your boot camps. I mean, it was way before those guys. So we were still first to do that as well. And it was interesting because then we could, even at that time, started to understand there's like these 2 distinct markets that we're servicing. Some people would use layers and do like 2 days personal training and then throw in an afterburn, we called it, right, as our metabolic training. But a lot of people didn't. It was like you had your personal training crowd and you had your boot camp crowd.
Right.
So when you had a specific crowd, it was probably a price point sensitivity thing. It was an age thing, but also driven by price, right? Like younger people would come in and do like team training, we called it. And we noticed the trends that we currently see, which is like the churn was higher. You know what I mean? It was like, it was just a different customer. It was like, in a lot of ways, they paid a lot less and they were a little bit more difficult to please. Our personal training clients paid more. They got better service. So by default, they were easier to please.
Right. Yeah. I think that's still just like a misunderstood actual workout anyway.
What's that?
Like HIIT workouts and everything, boot camp. Yeah, like
So
what
stupid.
What
Like,
you build it for intentionally, like when you started it, was like an add-on to your strength training programs.
yeah, that's a great point. Like we never built it thinking it was a good standalone service ever.
Right.
We liked it as a supplement too, right? And then we'll get to like how that manifested itself outside of our facility with others. But for us, it was just like a thing we could add on that would give us a lower membership price point for like, we thought, okay, we'll capture that chunk of the market too. They can't afford $400 a month. Maybe they can pay $150, right? That kind of idea. And then we would layer it in. You could do that and this. And if you bought a robust personal training package, you could then come to these other ones and we would prescribe them like 2 days of this, 1 day of that kind of idea. And then I'm glad we did it because we really learned a lot about running that model and maybe some of the holes in it and the things we didn't like about it. I mean, look, if we're, our target market, 45, 65, typically dinged up. And by default, if you offered it, they were like, oh, that's cool. I'll come try it. And it was like, it was not good. Like the exercises that had to be programmed, you had to make it really hard because you were trying to appeal to that sort of metabolic HIIT crowd. And that wasn't the best prescription then for the people that were doing personal training, right?
Still not.
Well, now the science is caught up and it's the dumbest thing ever. And there's so many, and I'm just going to say it, there's a million franchises that do it and you only do it because it's popular. You are backing your way into science at best to run boot camp style workouts. I call bullshit. I'm tired of pulling punches. I'm not throwing shade at any one particular one. I understand why you do it. But if you look at the latest science that's coming down the pipe from the best scientists in the world, right? Not just exercise gurus and Instagram people, the best scientists in the world, HIIT style workouts done all the time is bullshit. It's better than nothing. But if you're going to work out and you're already working out, it's a bullshit way to do your exercise. Period. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Over it. Okay. But we launched it. We were first to do it. And to your point, it was sort of a nice to have add-on thing, but it ended up becoming this separate like line item of revenue for us. And I'm glad we did it. We learned a lot about it and what we didn't like about it. Then, technology was, wearables and that stuff was coming into favor. So we were able to adopt some technology and then we started like do it on your own. Right.
Yep.
So it was like you could come into our facility because we were 8,000 feet and you could work out on your own and we would program for you. So that was another service line item. And we still had a few one-on-one holdouts, right? So it was like, now we have, do it on your own. We have essentially like HIIT, right? Yep. We have personal training and we have one-on-one, right? So all 4 levels of service that we're servicing, which I'm really glad we did it because we got to really look at each type of customer profile, who did what was important, what did they need, right? Where was the real, juice, I guess, for us? What did we feel best about putting in the market? And then eventually when COVID hit, we had a tool and we were able to do virtual. So it was like a great opportunity for us to pivot and fully train people virtually. Just so happens we're sitting on this perfect tech tool where we could actually do that and hold people accountable, give them habits at home. So it's like we've literally done all of those different services.
We were doing that before COVID too. So
yeah, exactly. Like we would have people that would come in here and train, and then they would move, and we would train them remotely, and then the app became the program. Before that, it was like different. I'll talk about kind of the tech around what we do, but then eventually, when we decided to go from licensing to just franchising, we looked at these 4 verticals that we had been servicing with, and they're all distinctly different customers with different needs, different tech solutions around each one. And the one that was still what we were the best at, that was very differentiating in any market, that drove the most revenue for us, sometimes as much as 85% of our overall revenue, with 4 offerings of service, it was small group personal training, which at that time we had figured out how to go up to 6 people, right, and still keep it relevant because now we had tech solutions around it. So when we decided to go to franchising, it's like, okay, this is what we do well. This is what most of our customers appreciate, which is telling us everything we need to know. There's a plethora of like boot campy style businesses that are doing HIIT stuff all around us. If they're dedicated to just that for that particular vertical, they do it better than us anyway. They build music, the whole thing is set up to do this one thing, which I would argue that everyone else in the market's doing the same thing, but they're still better in that vertical than we were. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, this isn't even our thing, right? Like, what are we doing? Like, we might have started it, but like, we aren't the best at it because we're not putting all of our juice into it. So, and as you guys know, listening, if you want to scale something, it has to be dead simple. That's a really important precursor to being successful at scale is simple. The scale alone will make it complex. You don't have to make things very complicated. So, okay, what's the thing that we do, and to peel it all the way back to personal training. Now, what that also meant for us was literally, we go back to service offerings. Imagine you've got people in your business that do it on their own. You've got, we got 100 and some odd, 200, let's just say, hit clients, right, that weren't doing personal training.
Yep.
Personal training only clients, a handful that did hit, but mostly just did that.
Yep.
And a few one-on-one clients. So to take that, you're talking about disrupting your business and saying, we're getting rid of do it on your own. We're getting rid of hit, large groups or team or classes, essentially.
Yep.
And we're going back to the core of what we do well. This is how we started. This was the sweet spot in our business. It's been 85% of our revenue. It services a clientele that's underserved in the fitness space. We're literally in markets at this point from India to Tasmania and everything in between. There's a true gap here, and we know how to service it well.
Yep.
This is where we're going. That's super disruptive because we essentially had to get rid of or convert 200 additional clients into a service that they probably couldn't afford and weren't paying for. And it was not a popular decision. I mean, people were really upset. And, for us to say, well, this is our core competency.
Right.
We're getting back to that. It's what we feel best about putting into market. If they had been coming to our class-based offering and had been successful and hadn't been hurt and all the things that we were seeing,
right,
if it just didn't apply to them, they were upset. It was like, well, I didn't get hurt. I liked it. I can't believe you're getting rid of it. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm like, I anticipated that. I even offered to reach out to a local operator that I like. He's a good guy. He's like a mile down the street. He does HIIT training. It's like, listen, if you guys want to go as a group there, I'll call him and see if he'll offer some kind of mild discount for you guys, right? So we offered to do him a solid, but people don't like it. They feel like they're being
right.
I'm not important to you. Screw you. That kind of thing.
Pretty much.
Yeah, and I understand that, but I mean, I didn't say disruption was easy. I said it would be pain, or loss. Loss is pain. Pain is grief. Grief is what it is. You got to let it happen. So it's just. You got to, it's not for wimps. Like if you're going to be in a small business and you want to last for 30 years, you're going to have to disrupt yourself. And every time you do, it's going to suck. I'm just going to give you that.
Yeah. Well,
but it's worth it.
Business wise, you saw ahead that it's not the best thing for the client. It's literally every competitor, everybody's doing that. You have to, and you're probably making more money now as a business without having it.
Yeah.
I mean,
we had so much top end revenue at one point, Matt. I think that might have been right when you were getting here. Insane. And I would go to these shows and say, we got 8,000 feet. We're doing 2.7 million. I mean, crazy revenues out of a small space. But I would say my margins weren't any better than they are in the small model because it's dead simple. So what am I doing? Right. I like to help more people. It felt fun. There was 1 million people involved in our business.
Right.
But we had a lot of activity and fat on our business that was completely unnecessary in hindsight. But you can do that when you're a crazy entrepreneur with one facility. But any of you guys listening that want to scale your business and you're planning for the future, it's like you want to think simple. Simple's going to scale much better. So,
well, I mean, just give props already. Like how many people I talked to a lot of people already that are like, hey, how'd you guys change your business to small group? I mean, I probably once a week somebody's asking me that question or asked me how we went there, right?
Yeah, and it was in 2002, right? 20 years ago, because we just organically noticed it and thought, well, that's cool, right? Again, we just told the story, So that's what we did with our brand. That's what we did with our services. We disrupted our own technology. Well, I could just say we disrupt it if you don't have it. But when we opened, there was no internet, which is really weird to think about. So I'll tell a story about people always ask, how did you track personal training sessions with no internet? Well, we didn't have some weird Lotus computer program
just Monopoly money.
We did, yeah. So I always laugh about. Remember the big things that go and they would cut money.
Yeah.
So we would print money on these sheets, and the money was different colors depending on what you were buying. So you could buy a 5-pack, a 10-pack, a 20-pack, a 30-pack, and a 50-pack. That's what we had at the time. And so depending on what pack you bought, we would take that color sheet and we would cut it, right? And it had something on the front and it had the name of the business, Good Bodies and blah, blah, blah. And then we would put 5 in each, if they were pink as an example, 5 would go in each envelope, right? Or if they were 10, they were green and they would go 10 in each envelope. And then we would lock those suckers away because that was money, right? That's real money.
Somebody rob you and steal your sessions.
No, my sessions are gone. And so we would, when someone paid us, say for 10 sessions, we would give them the envelope that had the green vouchers in it.
Right.
And then they would bring in a voucher when they came into workout and redeem it with their coach. The coach would keep and collect them And then at payroll, the coach would turn their vouchers in, and that's how I knew how many sessions they had serviced. And actually, as much as it sounds crazy, we didn't have a lot of people like printing their own money, and we didn't have a lot of people, thankfully, that lost theirs because it was really hard to keep track, right, of how many they had used. And then, of course, once we started to understand, like, okay, now we're using a spreadsheet, that's a little bit easier. And then we were one of the first companies to ever adopt MindBody, which is like the largest fitness software in the world now. We were one like number 40 out of everyone in the world to start it, right? So we started with MindBody, and it just evolved in the CRMs, and we just evolved with the technology at that point. But same thing for program design. So program design used to be I hired 1099 contractors that were specialists in their area and let them program themselves. Terrible mistake, and almost sank my business. I've told that 1,000,000 times. When we came back from that, look, screw this. We're controlling the programming. It's our customer. I do the marketing. I got all the risk. I'll decide what they're going to do in the club, and the coaches will just follow suit, right? Mm-hmm. So we did that. Now, that was all done on a Word document at the time. Yeah. Well, and in one-on-one, it was easy. But once you go to like 4, it was like, okay, so we're on Word documents, and let's just say by this time we were on a like spreadsheet template, right, for each person, which we still use a variation of actually for the internal programming because it's just so quick and easy. And we got so much cool history, and the way that we built it really works for us. It's not customer facing, so what does it matter, right? It just makes it easy for everybody to see everything on one sheet. But when we evolved from the one-on-one to the up to 4, and we were working off of spreadsheets, it was like, we felt like every single client still had to get a personalized program. But we had a certain philosophies based on our influences, which were the best strength and conditioning coaches in the world. So it was like, well, wait a minute. Like these end up being like regressed versions or work around 1 or 2 injuries, but kind of the same push, pull, hip, knee, core philosophy that we do, right? So it was like, well, why are we writing individual programs? So imagine the real application of that. 4 different spreadsheets that a coach has to take out onto the floor. And in each hour, they've got 4 different ones. They're coaching 4 different people. And we felt like we needed to do that. So we slowly evolved. We would just test the waters. It's like, well, let's not do that. Let's move to everybody doing the same workout on certain days, but we'll flip-flop the days. So say we had 6 coaches in the gym. It's like, okay, coaches 1 and 2 are going to do the A workout. And coaches, 3 and 4 are going to do the B workout, right? And so that if you looked across the room, our concern was that everyone would look around and they'd be like, wait, we're all doing the same thing. I thought it was personal training, right? So we did that for a while, which is like this rotating schedule. But lo and behold, if someone worked out on Tuesday with trainer B and then they didn't stay with trainer B, and on Friday they came in with trainer whoever, that person would be on a same schedule now. And so they would like, wait, I can't do the B workout because they did that with a different trainer who's on a different schedule than me. Oh, God. And so then by default, by the end of the week, it was a shit show anyway. You still had trainers running 4 different programs, right? Yeah, so then it was like, well, but the clients didn't notice it. They thought it was great. So that it worked. And then we're like, let's do this just for shits and giggles. Let's try to run the same template for the whole gym on any given day because the science is solid. And then we will adapt it for fitness levels, how people feel that day, and individual injuries and goals. And lo and behold, no one even noticed, right? But it was all head trash that we had. Mm-hmm. So that was an evolution.
Yeah, it was.
And then we went from spreadsheets to then we adopted, we had our CRM and everything. Yeah, check. And then we adopted an app for that. And the app became the digital version of the pieces of paper. Mm-hmm. So now we've got an app. There's, we were able to then go to 6 people, keep the cost even lower for the consumer. Much more profitable for the owner. So win-win again. And now you've got 6 tiles on a screen. You can touch on the screen. Here's Matt, fitness level.
That might be the best one.
The best iteration of what we've done.
I mean, going in there and pulling 30 papers out of a filing cabinet.
Remember that?
And then putting them back.
Well, then remember the trainers, people just get lazy over time. And so like they wouldn't put them back. So you'd have like 59 pieces of paper on your clipboard and all of a sudden, a client changes their schedule, and the coach that still had them on the clipboard was anticipating seeing them. So they're like, I don't need to file it. I'll see them again on Friday. Yeah. But they come in Friday afternoon.
Where's your clipboard?
Yes, so you scramble through their clipboard, and you got to shuffle through 45 pieces of paper to find that one person to run that one workout. It just made communications. We did it, but it made it much more difficult. So the digital version of client cards, I guess is what you call them, was a real evolution for us. But each one of those was disruptive, and that sounds more like an evolution, but I mean, keep in mind, like when you get used to like getting physical pieces of paper that you can bring in, right?
Yeah,
and that's your payroll. To disrupt that, it's like, now what do we have to do? Now we're working on a spreadsheet. How do I know what I have? My clients don't know how many sessions they have left, right? There was all that kind of stuff you had to work through.
I mean, disruptive for client wise is probably what most people think, but there's probably good disruption for your own employees.
I would say that's even more difficult. It's like the operational disruption in your business, if you're not careful, can be catastrophic. So you really have to make sure that it's the right move and that it's worth the disruption to get it right. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the lens that we look at. It's like, again, our third and maybe most important core values, keep it simple. So when we look at something, if it doesn't fit that criteria, if we're like, is this really going to move the needle at all? And is it simple, or is it just adding complexity because it's cool, right? Because that's a bane of most entrepreneurs, right? And then the last vertical where we've disrupted ourselves a million times was what we did outside the gym. So when we figured out how to train more than one person with one coach, at one point, I think we were deemed like one of the highest revenue per square foot facilities in the country. So that put me on the radar for consulting, speaking first, and then talks, to people about how we do what we do. Like, again, you still get the question, how did you go from one-on-one to this? It's like, I would just teach it. It was still foreign to people. And so they would reach out for their specific application of it. And they might be coming from a boot camp trying to get to small group training, or they might be coming from one-on-one trying to get to small group. And the playbooks for those were a bit different. So we started to build SOPs around like how to run those plays, right? And then we had people then asking us, well, can you just write our workouts, or can we buy your sales system, or can we come down and do a day of consulting with you? And it was like, okay. But just like program design, we started telling the same stories and the same principles were repeating themselves over and over again. I'm like, whoa. Instead of recreating the wheel every time, let's just create a mechanism, right, where we can deploy these things to them, that will just make it easier. So that was kind of the very start of what learning management systems, LMSs, were coming out. So we put everything we had on an LMS, and we launched it, and we called it, licensing, right? Yep. And it's confusing sometimes with franchising, but just imagine like a white label version of what we do. And we were everywhere, man. We were in CrossFit gyms. We were like, you name it, large tennis centers.
They're like 2,500 or something crazy?
Yeah, some nuts. I mean, everywhere from India to, Dubai and Tasmania and everything in between. It was like, wow. I mean, this thing, it really scaled well, which was very good. As long as we didn't have a language translation on our site. So as long as everyone could speak English, we could go there, right? Even if it was in India, they're like, listen, everybody here speaks English, no biggie. I was like, all right, cool. Well, then that led to us, we got some traction in a couple different brands. Anytime Fitness is the one I think most people have heard me talk about. So I'm really honored that, they chose to work with us. They're a great franchise, and Chuck and Dave are amazing guys that built it. And all the people I've met through there have just been top-notch people. But we had several hundred Anytime Fitness clubs that we were working with. One of them was the guy who was in charge of helping grow the PT programs. His name is Bobby Hines, a good friend of mine. And Bobby's like, hey, he told corporate, you should look at talking to this guy. And so, I flew up to corporate, and they're like, what are you doing with our clubs? Because in a franchise structure, you kind of want to know, like, hey, what are my franchisees doing, And I told them kind of what we did, and then we ended up working our way through like maybe a potential acquisition. We just kind of went back and forth. And then what we figured out was they would buy us out of their market, and we'd do a 5-year contract with them. So that put me essentially like on their advisory board for how to roll out a coaching mechanism.
Yep.
So that wasn't, a disruption, because that was a little bit at the expense of like, okay, well, why would I want somebody in between me and my customer, right? It's like, I'm going right to your Anytime Fitness people. Why would I want to like give it to you and then you have to give it to them? Why don't you just let me give it to them, right? But I now understand more in hindsight like why they wanted to do that, because like you want control in a franchise, you got to get your arms around it. And instead of like recreating it on their own, they were just like, come in and build it for us. So smart guys, right? So we did, and it worked out really well. I mean, that was a whole nother successful venture for us. So that worked out well. And then eventually, when that ran its course, and then we had boutique fitness coming to us, and they were like, can we borrow your sales system? And we started seeing some of our branding showing up on some of these folks' websites and some of our trademark stuff. And it was like, it's getting a little too close for comfort in some ways. Plus, what we learned through a couple of potential acquisitions is the enterprise value of our IP in a licensed business is not nearly what it would be in a franchise business, right? That company would be more valuable. Plus, the vehicle of franchising allowed us to put guardrails and controls around what we're doing. So we weren't doing something drastically different for a CrossFit than we were for someone else. It's like we can put all our juice into one thing, right? And again, simplify for scale purposes, which is why we were like, okay, cool. We're just going to do franchising now. We're going to do it with our name on the front door, and we got a perfect product offering. And now we'd had 12 years or 15 years now of like deep market penetration all over the world to know exactly where we should go. But you want to talk about disruptive. We did that at the expense of another business that, by the way, was kicking ass, right? Now, we still service that legacy revenue, but to say, hey, we're going to put a stop to new sales on this side of the house to pursue this other thing. And by the way, formulating and building a franchise is obscenely expensive. You got to have a long runway, and you got to have like a lot of fortitude. Very hard to break through some of the metrics that we've already broken through, and we'll continue to, but it's not easy at all. And it's done at the real expense, like financial, and also the expense of this other business model that, by the way, wasn't broken, right? And then that was like, okay, well, I'm not going to do as much speaking in the industry, which I really enjoy doing. It doesn't pay that well, but I don't need to get in front of a bunch of gym owners anymore and talk, because that's not my core customer anymore. Now I'm selling to an investor who wants a different avenue, to a place to park some money, right? Wants to buy 10 locations, and he's interested in the business, and he's a good entrepreneur.
Right.
He's not sitting in the audience if I'm speaking to personal trainers, right? So it was at the expense of a lot. So it's very disruptive for me personally, very disruptive to the business model of licensing.
Sure.
Still the right evolution and the right move.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's 4 different verticals, Matt. That's our brand, the services that we offered here, the technology that we've disrupted and built, and then ultimately like why we've evolved even what we do outside the gym. So those are really good examples, and probably a lot more detail than any of you needed. And I hope it helps you understand why disrupting your own business is very important. Now, you got to do it with integrity, and you got to really think about where you're headed next, because disruption is not squirrel brain addition of things. It's not piling things on, right? It's moving from one to another in a meaningful way. And like we said earlier, making sure that it's threaded within the culture and the core competency of your team and what you're doing, right? And, I've got questions that we could probably follow up with on other podcasts. Like, if I'm going to disrupt this part of my business, what are the questions I should be asking myself? Yeah. Not like, do I think it's cool or do I think it's awesome?
What?
Yeah, exactly. Do nutrition now. I'm like, okay, I mean, that's great. But like, how much money are you going to make, and how much manpower goes into it? And it's like, oh, I don't know. It's like, okay, well, those are things you might want to think about, right? And at what expense to your time, money, energy, and is it worth it? Do your clients really want it? Is it something you think's dope? Like, are you just into it? Right? It's like that kind of idea. So anyway, I couldn't go on forever, but does that help? I know, because you were just like, whatever we're talking about. Matt's so in the weeds right now because he's coaching franchisees. He's got so many cool things going on, and we got a discovery day today where he's going to like blow people's socks off with all the cool tech we have and our workouts. So I know he's busy. So did it make sense to you, though?
No, it's great, yeah. That's why I'm numb to everything now. It's because of you and all these changes.
Matt, I could be like, Matt, we're going into the hamburger business. We're going to disrupt McDonald's. He'd be like, all right.
Exactly.
So do I get a grill at home or do I grill here? Like, he would just like roll with it, right? Well, one of our core values used to be, and I still think it's important. It just, again, per our most important core value, we simplified it to 3, but one of them was drive change. Drive change really meant this: disrupt your own business, because if you don't, I guarantee you somebody else is going to do it, and that's what I want people to hear.
Yeah, awesome stuff.
All right, brother. Thanks.